Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tutorium in Intensive English at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I'm Jordan, your grammar teacher. For today's module, we are looking at active and passive voice in the simple present. So let's look at what our plan for today is. Today we will look at example sentences using active and passive voice, and we'll learn the grammar rules. So first of all, what's active voice and what's passive voice? On the left, we have examples of active voice sentences. I'll read those. Jenna orders pho when she goes to Lotus. People make mistakes. You use the passive voice in writing and in more formal contexts. Now, let's change these sentences from active to passive. On the right, it says, pho is ordered by Jenna when she goes to Lotus. Mistakes are made by someone. The passive voice is used in writing and in more formal contexts. So, what's the difference between these two types of sentences? Well, let's take a closer look. So, there are some things that I would like you to notice about active voice versus passive voice. In our first sentence, Jenna orders pho. That's a very basic sentence. This is the type of sentence that you learn from the beginning when you are learning English. When we look on the right, however, it says, pho is ordered by Jenna. So we can see that there are a few changes. They look pretty similar, but the word order is different. Let's look at another example. People make mistakes. On the other side, it says mistakes are made. Okay, so again, the word order is a little bit different. And lastly, you use the passive voice versus the passive voice is used. Word order, as I said, a little bit different. So what's different about the word order? In the active voice sentences, you start with the subject, then you have your verb, and then an object. However, for passive voice, the object goes to the beginning. Then there's a verb, and the subject moves to after the verb. In our second one, the same thing. In active voice, you have subject, verb, and object. Passive voice, it becomes object, verb. And in this case, the subject is actually gone. We'll look at that a little closer. In our last example, the same thing. You is the subject, use is the verb, and passive voice is the object. But of course, in the passive voice sentence, passive voice becomes the subject. It was originally the object. There's a verb, And in this case, the subject you has disappeared completely. We'll also talk about that later. So that brings us to our first rule. Rule number 1, in the passive voice, the subject and the object change positions. So the object in the active voice moves to the beginning of the sentence. And there is a verb, so there's still a verb. We'll look at that verb a little more closely in a bit. There is a verb in the middle. And then the subject from the active voice sentence now follows the verb in the passive voice sentence or disappears completely. We'll talk about that. Now, first of all, let's look at our verb. This will tell us about rule 2. So we have Jenna orders. Fa is ordered. People make. Mistakes are made. You use. The passive voice is used. Very similar. What's different? Well, first of all, with rule number 2, the active voice sentence now becomes, or the active voice verb now becomes be plus past participle. If you're not sure what past participle is, I recommend that you watch my video on present perfect. You need to know that to be able to use passive voice. So, orders is ordered. We add that verb to be, and the second verb becomes past participle. We also want to note that the subject of the passive voice sentence and the verb to be should agree. So for example, mistakes in the second passive voice sentence is the subject. For that reason, for the verb to be, we use are. Mistakes are made. And then lastly, to show the original subject, we can add by. So fa is ordered by Jenna. Mistakes are made by someone. This is really optional well, we'll talk about that in a second. But as we can see, like I talked about, the verb to be agrees with the subject of the passive voice sentence. Fa is singular, one. Fa is ordered. Mistakes is plural. Mistakes are made. The passive voice is singular, so the passive voice is used. Okay, let's move on. So you're probably wondering why you are learning this. Active voice sentences are the sentences that we use all the time. Why do we need to learn passive voice? Well, first of all, knowing different ways of speaking gives you more creativity when you are speaking or writing, right? It's also just used for its own special little reasons. So let's talk about those. The first reason why we use passive voice is that the object is, or we want to show that the object is more important than the original subject, and we want the object to become the focus of our sentence. So for example, Jenna orders pho. The active voice sentence, Jenna is the focus. But in the passive voice sentence, pho is ordered by Jenna, the pho becomes the focus. Rule number 2, why we use passive voice, is either we don't know the subject or we don't want to say the subject for some reason. So in the active voice sentence, people make mistakes. That subject is people. Well, in the passive voice, we don't really need to say that mistakes are made by people or who exactly made a mistake. It's just not really necessary. But also, maybe my coworker made a mistake and I don't want to say who did it. I can hide this name by using passive voice. So mistakes are made. I can say by someone if I want to, but I don't have to. Lastly, this is especially for writing. In academic writing, it sounds more formal to not use the word you. That sounds a bit informal to us. So for example, in the active voice sentence, you use the passive voice. That sounds like something you would say in a conversation with someone. But if you are writing, we can say the passive voice is used. Just another way to change up our language a little bit. So the passive voice can be pretty tough, but we are going to continue studying this. This is not the last lesson on the passive voice. So go ahead and review these rules for the passive voice, and we will review passive voice some more in our next video. Thanks for practicing with me today, and I hope that you enjoy all of your future passive voice lessons. Thank you.